morning, everybody, and welcome to the June 22nd, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format that we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home and Save Lives order. This is our very first Zoom meeting of the Planning Commission, so this format enables the city and the Planning Commission to meet, to hear from the community, and to take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with a public comment, followed by a work session on middle housing. There's just a few housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I'll take care of first. So thanks for your patience as I work through them. First of all, anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you do wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and have not already done so, please raise your hand, your virtual hand, to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. First of all, for those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click on the blue hand icon. Anyone listening on a phone can press *9. So when the public comment begins, I will announce the next two speakers at a time, or our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. So when it's your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone, so nobody will need to do that. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes, so we'll kind of gauge depending on how many folks we have to speak today. I'd like to ask the commissioners to use your video, to remain muted unless you're speaking, and to use the raise hand feature to be placed in the queue so I can see those. So that your time to speak, oh, I'm sorry. Also, please don't use the chat feature so that we can maintain transparency. Finally, I want to thank everyone again for their patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work within this new virtual meeting format. As always, please feel free to contact staff if there is any testimony that you were not able to provide. At this time, I'm going to go to the public comment portion. So public comment is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics or items, except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. The Planning Commission reserves the 10 minutes at the beginning of this meeting for public comment. Okay, so as a reminder, your hand must be raised, and when it's your turn, your microphone will be unmuted by staff, and then staff will let you know when your time is up. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we have anybody who is interested in public comment. All right, I do not see any. So seeing none. Before we jump into our main agenda item, I definitely would like to take a few minutes to recognize that Commissioner Steve Baker is joining us for his very last Planning Commission meeting as a Planning Commissioner. Commissioner Baker, your service to the community and this commission is so very much appreciated. I'm going to toss it over to Alyssa to say a few words with a presentation that she's prepared, and then I'll give the commission a few moments after Alyssa's presentation to say any questions or thoughts to share with us. So Alyssa, go ahead, and it's all yours.
Great. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge that Commissioner Taylor has joined, and that her name is showing up as mine because I just forwarded her my link, but I think she can change that. So and I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share right now, and give me just a second to get that going. What are you guys seeing? Do you see the slide, or do you see like the whole slideshow?
You see the whole slideshow.
Oh, that's obnoxious. Hold on.
Slide there as well.
Okay. Oh, it's on my other screen. That's why I have 3 monitors. That's what's going on.
Yes, I do too. So
Give me a second.
I feel your pain.
Well, darn it. It's only going to share the other one. So we'll have to do it in this mode. Actually,
So if you stop sharing, Alyssa, and then reshare again with your desktop, it might work.
Okay. Is that sharing now? Okay.
We're seeing
Tell me, what do you guys see?
we see the slide, but then we see kind of the stuff around it that says slide 1 of 11. It has some.
Dang it. Okay, I'm gonna give me just a second. I think it's these multiple monitors, and then I'm gonna go ahead and give a try what Elena just mentioned. So, okay, I'm gonna do this again. Okay, well, this is how it's gonna be, I guess. It'll work.
I think it's fine.
Okay, it serves its purpose. So at any rate, we wanted to take a few minutes to just thank Commissioner Baker for his 8+ years of service with the Planning Commission. He actually started in October of 2011. That was before we, I think before we started appointing people more on our fiscal cycle. During that time, there were 290 Planning Commission meetings. In 1 year, there were actually 49 Planning Commission meetings. I think that's an all-time high. That's pretty impressive. So you think about that, he's spent, two hours a meeting, and let's just say he didn't go to every meeting, but he's probably spent, well over 500 hours just in Planning Commission meetings during the course of his tenure here. And that doesn't even include all of the time that he reviewed packets, some of which can be pretty large. So we're just, really thankful for his service and his dedication and his leadership. And here we go. And so here's just an example of a couple of meetings. We've been webcasting these, I think, since somewhere around 2012 or 11. And so Steve's had a lot of opportunity to be on this big screen here. And he's participated in a lot of big projects. Just to name a few, the Envision Eugene recommendation that was in part of 2012. There's been a number of neighborhood planning efforts, including South Willamette, also the Downtown Riverfront e-website, and then of course the giant UGB adoption recommendation that came through in 2017. Along the way, there have been numerous appeals, code amendments, and other big projects, Metro Plan amendments that he's definitely had his hand in. Just as an example, and this was kind of a fun picture, this is the last Planning Commission meeting that was held over at the old City Hall in the old council chambers. And this was on digital signs. And you'll notice, maybe you see some familiar faces up there on the dais, but the only one that's still on the Planning Commission is Steve. Other big code amendments that Steve participated in include multifamily, sign code, downtown riverfront, deer fencing, single family code amendments, ADUs multiple times. And then, in the last couple of years, we've had some fun ones like marijuana and signs for the Gordon Hotel and probably more ADUs. Let's see. Also, one of the things when we had, all of our planning commissioners were males of similar age, and they tended to dress a lot alike. And so we had a little bit of fun with them one Halloween back in 2011. And so we borrowed, you guys remember, I don't know, some of you may remember Steve Oakes. We borrowed a bunch of his plaid shirts and dressed up like the Planning Commission. And it was pretty fun. And you'll notice Steve doesn't always wear plaid. He often wears blue though. So we love the plaid shirts. This was our 2012 Planning Commission, basically the Planning Commission that was here when Steve started. Again, some familiar faces, but definitely a very different makeup than we have today over his 8 years. Another thing that I just fondly remember from Steve's time period is that we had come up with what we called the 8-foot work plan. And it was everything that we needed to do to adopt Envision Eugene. And so we had a planning commission retreat and we did some calendaring. And then we went through that giant work plan that you can see in the lower photo there, just to go through everything that needed to be done. And Steve was a part of every single one of those actions. Steve's also been great at coming to open houses, whether it was a planning commission hosted open house or making it happen, project fairs. Steve has always made an effort to come to those events, and we're really appreciative of that. So he can hear what other folks have to say and see what information we're providing as well. Steve's also been, an incredible community volunteer back to his West University neighborhood days. He was also, involved in the infill compatibility standards project pre-planning commission. And then while he's been on planning commission, he has been a representative for the historic review board. And he's, in these photos are actually a presentation that was held at the library during, I believe it was during Historic Preservation Week, that Steve put together and organized. And that's been, a tremendous asset to that board. And here is our 2020 Planning Commission. Definitely different makeup other than Steve from where we were in 2012. And so we just really want to thank Steve for his dedication. I mean, that's one of the words I think about when I think of Steve. Not only is he like dedicated to his neighborhood, dedicated to his community, a dedicated bike rider, without fail, he was always prepared for every single planning commission meeting. I mean, he had clearly read the packet, thought about it, had articulate questions, and had formulated his own opinions. And I really appreciate that he was, always very full, just a lot of integrity and a lot of dedication. And we really, really appreciate your service, Commissioner. Thank you. And Terry, I don't know if I've skipped over anything that you wanted to call out.
I just wanted to add one anecdote and thanks to Steve, and that is from before his time on Planning Commission, when I was staffing the Infill Compatibility Standards task team. And Steve would often attend those meetings, which were in the float room with 19 community volunteers sitting around that table discussing ways to make infill more compatible. And Steve would bring a big Nancy's yogurt container of blueberries. And that just exemplified his generous nature, his commitment to healthy food and local food that he could transport by bike. So thank you, Steve.
Oh, well, that's really nice, you guys. I have a few people in the queue, so I'll go ahead and call on you in the order that you've popped in there. I'll start with Commissioner Taylor.
Hi, everyone. And Steve, I've known you a long time, and I think Alyssa summarized kind of my experience with you, and that is your dedication. You're quite inspiring. You are everywhere. If there's a public meeting, you're often present. I would say you can almost depend on it. You're thorough and thoughtful. Like Alyssa said, you're always prepared and willing to volunteer. You're committed and dedicated to things that you really love. And it is inspirational, Steve, both from a neighborhood perspective, sustainability, the environment, biking, less trips, neighborhood issues, citywide issues, and your passion for just making a better place. So I really have valued having you on the Planning Commission and being able to experience this. I mean, you and I don't always see eye to eye. I definitely am they're participating from the perspective of really looking at the planning documents And I use the planning documents more frequently on a professional level, and it was refreshing, and I appreciate the diversity on Planning Commission and your perspective that you would bring in. It was an ability to kind of look at some of the interpretations, look at the code, look at the approach in a different way, which I think is the value of having a diverse planning commission. So thanks, Steve, for all of your service hours. And I know this won't be the end. I know we'll continue to see you at all these meetings. So I look forward to seeing you next.
Well, thanks, Commissioner Taylor. Next, I'm going to go to Commissioner Ramey.
Well, hi, Steve. It's great to see you one last time. And as Kristen said, I'm sure we will see you again. Your and my time goes way back to when you were at the Department of Energy in the state of Oregon, I think. So it's been a pleasure to know you and work with you over the years. And beyond our awesome facial hair, we share some other things in common. One would be a love of bike riding. Another would be a love of environmentalism. And so I really appreciate having that opinion around, sort of your ideas around. And you will leave me with the legacy of being prepared. And so I will always try to be as prepared as you are and were. And so I thank you for that. And I hope we do see you around. Thanks for all your service.
Very well said, Commissioner Ramey. Commissioner Borofsky.
Thank you. Chris, there's no way you'll ever be as prepared as Stephen is for these meetings. I don't think that anybody could be as prepared as Stephen comes. The number of tabs in the binder are always far exceeding mine, and I appreciate that a lot. One of the things that I got to know about Steve and share with Steve is that we both, I think, came to the Planning Commission through the neighborhood organizations and bring that voice to the Planning Commission. I'm not a planner. I don't go into the code quite as much as some of the other people here, but I think I and Stephen especially brings the feel of what their neighborhood is like. And I think that is, I'm going to try and carry that forward from what I've learned from Stephen, because he came from the West University neighborhood, which is one of the most dense neighborhoods in our city. And he's seen the struggles that have gone on with densification. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be looking at and trying to plan for and deal with the consequences and the opportunities that densification has. And he is, in the 6+ years that I've been on the commission with him, he's often brought forth some of the challenges that go along with increased densifications. And so that's something that I will miss hearing from him in the committee meetings, but know that there is a legacy of him going forward. So thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Commissioner Borofsky. That was great. I have Commissioner Beeson in the queue next.
Hi, Steve. I want to certainly echo what's been said. I don't know you as well. I've been around you for about a year, but I definitely appreciated getting to know you and your thoroughness, your commitment, certainly your preparation for the meetings and your questions, all of that shines through and has set a good example. So I do appreciate, I appreciate all the help that you gave me over the year. There are times I spent learning from you about how to try to put some of this together. So I would just say thank you very much, and I wish you well.
Great, thank you. Well, I will chime in. It's just say a few very short words. Steve, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that you're wearing plaid, first of all, today. So thank you for thank you for continuing that tradition. And I'm definitely going to miss your insight. My colleagues have said it so well that you have always been the model planning commissioner when it comes to being prepared, and you set a very high standard that all of us, strive to work towards. And I will admit that is myself. And I've definitely always appreciated the work that you put into it, and keeping us on our toes. Unfortunately, you and I haven't known each other long because I haven't been on the commission for that long, but I'm really impressed by the amount of time that you have spent volunteering for our community. It's really important, and I'm a huge proponent, and I really would hope that you stay involved, and we hope to see more of you. So please don't be a stranger. We reserve 10 minutes at the beginning of every planning commission meeting. So I would hope that your voice is one of those voices to come join us now and again. So thank you so much. And I wish we were all in person where we could do something a little bit more than just say a few words, but maybe at some point we'll be back in closer contact. So for now, I will go ahead and move on to the next agenda.
Steve has his hand up.
Oh, Steve, you do. Please. I apologize.
Well,
that piece of the screen is being covered up by my script here. So Steve, please. Commissioner Baker, go for it.
Thank everyone for the kind words. And I've enjoyed my tenure on the planning commission. It's it has required a lot of work. It was interesting and challenging. I learned a lot about some things I didn't know anything about. And I do hope that, and I'm sure that the interest and commitment from the other commissioners will continue, and you'll find good replacements for us as we move on. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. We appreciate it. All right, well, I will go ahead and move us on to our next agenda item. And we've got Terry Harding joining us today to talk about the middle housing code amendments. And so, Terry, I'm going to go ahead and just kick it over to you.
Great, thank you, Tiffany.
You're welcome.
I'm going to assume you can all hear me, unless somebody sends me a frantic text that something's going wrong. I'm going to share my screen in just a moment, but first I'll introduce myself. I'm Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for community planning and design. I've been on special assignment to the city's Emergency Operations Center for the last 11 weeks. And so it's really nice to be back in planning, even though we're on Zoom today. It's nice to see all your faces. Okay, let's share my screen. I designed this PowerPoint with a little bit of space on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you want to put everybody's picture over on the right-hand side, that should be okay and should not cover up too much of the presentation. So for the middle housing project, we have a core team. Oh, first the presentation outline. Nope. First this. Sorry. Our core team includes myself, Lauren Summers from the City Attorney's Office, and Sophie McGinley on public involvement, both of whom will have a part for this presentation, plus Jennifer Knapp on urban design and Jeff Gepper on code development. We also have a larger team that collaborates across departments, for example, Public Works team members looking at our infrastructure capacity to handle additional input. So for today's presentation, we'll be talking about House Bill 2001 and how the city will implement it through a process of creating middle housing code amendments. We'll talk through the timeline, which includes a state set deadline for adopting the code changes. And then we'll talk about our draft public involvement plan and ask for your feedback so we can refine it before we take it to the City Council next month. The overall goals of the Middle Housing Project are to comply with and implement the House Bill, further ongoing city work aimed at addressing equity and affordability, and enable more production of diverse types of housing across Eugene. As you may recall, our first pillar for Envision Eugene is to provide housing affordable to all income levels. The Middle Housing Project helps achieve the overarching aim of the Housing Tools and Strategies process completed in 2018, which was to identify actions to increase housing affordability, availability, and diversity of type. Now for a summary of what the bill requires. In 2019, House Bill 2001 was passed by the Oregon legislature to partially address the deepening housing crisis in our state. While a variety of versions were debated in the legislature and the city weighed in on the language, it was ultimately passed into law and includes a deadline for implementation by June 30th, 2022. If the city chooses not to adopt our own code by the deadline, the state's model code, which is currently under development, will apply directly, and Lauren will talk more about that later. The full bill is in your packets, but this is the high-level summary. Oregon cities over 25,000 population are required to allow middle housing types in areas that allow single detached dwellings. The middle housing types are duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. The law includes a requirement that cities must allow duplexes to be built on each lot or parcel. Triplexes, quads, cottage clusters, and townhouses must be allowed in residential zones that allow detached single dwellings, but not necessarily on every lot or parcel. And again, more on this later when Lauren talks. In addition, the bill states that cities may regulate the siting and design of middle housing through reasonable standards that do not discourage the development of middle housing. We may also add protective measures such as design standards, as long as they're adopted in accordance with statewide planning goals and rules, and they don't discourage development. There's also a longer summary in attachment A that is a useful guide to the bill. So here's our city's zoning map. The city will be required to amend the zoning standards in all residentially zoned areas to comply with this bill. A large part of the city is zoned R1 in the cream color on the map. Our R2, R3, R4, and some special area zones will also need to be amended, and those are in the yellow to tan and orange colors and the teal color, which doesn't show up super well on this map. For those watching or new to this process, we do have an interactive zoning map on the city's website. So let's meet the housing types that are called out in this bill. Here we have the duplex, triplex, and fourplex. And basically these are 2 units on a lot, 3 units on a lot, and 4 units on a lot. Whether or not they share common walls is a subject of some discussion currently. But as written in the bill, they are just specific to the number of units on any given lot. Here's the cottage cluster and the townhouse or row house. This example, I believe, is Amazon Cottages on the left and Peterson row houses at 17th and Olive on the right. So a cottage cluster is a group of smaller, typically individual homes grouped around common open space. And townhouses or row houses are attached in a row, usually 1 or 2 stories with front stoops or porches. In 2017, I believe it was, the city produced a missing middle handbook. It's on our website and easy to find if you just Google Eugene missing middle handbook. And it showcases examples of middle housing types that exist in Eugene, often without drawing a lot of notice due to their house-like design. There's also a middle housing walking tour as part of this handbook that you can take to view the different types from the sidewalk, and that's on the west side of downtown. And now I'm going to pass it to Lauren to talk about the state process that's underway.
Oh, we can't hear you, Lauren.
She's give her a second. Nope. I guess one thing I could do is go on and come back to you, Lauren, at the end and hope that your microphone issues are resolved by the end. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so Lauren's piece is going to talk about the deadlines and the process in different committees that are working on the model code and minimum standards. So she just has these 2 slides. Still no Lauren.
I was going to say, maybe Lauren, if you can hear us, would it help to just call in? If you call in with your phone, we can still see you.
And sometimes if you sign out and sign back in, you might have missed a cue logging in to join the audio. That works a lot.
Thank you,
Thank you for those suggestions.
We can give Lauren a minute to see if we can.
Yeah. I also do have some brief notes from Lauren's slides, and then hopefully we'll have her on by the end and she can just answer questions. I think that might be a way to get us to finish the presentation. Is that okay, Tiffany?
That is quite all right. Go ahead, Terry, whatever works for you, that's fine. And just to remind commissioners, if you have comments or questions, just use the raise hand under your participants, use the raise hands feature. That way you'll be in order. Okay, go ahead.
We need a Wi-Fi booster in the city manager's office where Lauren is sitting right now. But the notes that I do have for this slide say the Department of Land Conservation and Development is responsible for developing a model middle housing code.
I think I'm in. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yay! Okay. All right. I apologize for that, everyone. Okay. So I missed a little bit of the presentation while I was trying to figure out my audio, but I think, oh, not too much. Okay, great.
We didn't do much.
As I think Terry was just mentioning, as the slide points out, and as Terry has mentioned before, there are deadlines associated with the adoption of code to comply with the requirements of House Bill 2001. For larger cities like Eugene, our deadline is June 30th, 2022. And if we don't adopt our own code that complies with the requirements of House Bill 2001 by that date, then the model code, which is currently being developed by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, will apply to us. So one way or the other, we will start enforcing a code that complies with House Bill 2001. We are planning to adopt our own compliant code before the deadline. Terry, if you'll go to the next slide. So to talk a little bit more about the model code and now these minimum standards that the state is developing. As we mentioned a couple times, DLCD staff are currently working on drafting the model code. The model code really has 2 purposes. One is that it is meant to be available for jurisdictions that don't want to do their own code amendments and just want a plug and play version of the code that they know will comply with House Bill 2001. The other purpose of the model code is as we just talked about, if a jurisdiction does not meet the deadline for adopting its own code, the model code will automatically apply. DLCD is also working on developing what they're calling minimum standards for compliance with House Bill 2001. And the minimum standards apply to jurisdictions that adopt their own codes. So you have your model code that it's kind of its own framework, and then separately minimum standards that jurisdictions like Eugene, who are adopting their own code, still have to meet to ensure that that code complies with House Bill 2001. The minimum standards are a little bit of a surprise. They were not specifically called out in the bill. The bill directs DLCT to adopt the model code, but not the minimum standards. And the minimum standards that directly apply to Eugene are being kind of worked on and drafted right now. So city staff are really closely tracking the development of those, both the model code and the minimum standards. Even though the model code won't directly apply to us, I think it will give us kind of a good idea of what DLCD is thinking in terms of compliance with House Bill 2001. DLCD staff have created a Rules Advisory Committee, or RAC, to review and make recommendations on the model code and the minimum standards. Councilor Pryor serves on the RAC. DLCD has also convened several technical advisory committees, or TACs, to make recommendations to the RAC. And then ultimately the Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC, will adopt the model code and minimum standards. LCDC has to adopt the model code and minimum standards before the end of this calendar year, before the end of 2020. So by a little bit later in this calendar year, we should have a pretty good idea of what the city will need to do in adopting our own code to comply with House Bill 2001 and DLCD's minimum standards. The RAC, TAC, and LCDC meetings are all open to the public right now via Zoom. And recordings of those meetings are posted on their website. And there's a lot of opportunity for the public to comment on the model code and the minimum standards. So if folks are interested, whether if folks are watching at home and are interested in participating in that process, all of the information is available on DLCD's website. The RAC and the TACs are still meeting fairly regularly to work through the model rules and minimum standards. So there's still time to affect that process. And our best guess is that LCDC will probably adopt the model rules and minimum standards at its November meeting, and I think hold a public hearing prior to that at its September meeting, maybe. And then just kind of quickly, 2 items of interest in the rulemaking that's happening. In terms of duplexes, the model code and minimum standards essentially require that cities treat duplexes the same as a single family home. So in order to comply with House Bill 2001, it cannot be harder to develop a duplex than it would be to develop a single family home. The RAC is still in the middle of working on the model code and minimum standards for the other middle housing types, the triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. And staff continues to monitor those conversations, but one of the big questions that the RAC is still grappling with is the question of where those other quote unquote higher middle housing types, triplex, quadplex, et cetera, will be located within a city. So the bill is really clear that duplexes must be allowed on every lot or parcel that's zoned for residential use and would allow a single family home. The bill uses slightly different language when it's talking about the other middle housing types. It talks about areas zoned for residential use. And so the RAC and DLCD staff are trying to figure out exactly what that means. What is an area zoned for residential use? And they're looking at 2 different approaches right now. The one they're calling the balloon approach and one that they're calling the whittle away approach. The balloon approach looks at areas in the city that appear to be kind of a good spot for higher density development, whether that means that they're close to services, close to transportation corridors, et cetera. And so it kind of identifies those areas as a beginning. And then thinks about whether those areas should be expanded or contracted. And the whittle away approach assumes that the higher middle housing types should be allowed throughout the city, like duplexes, except in goal protected areas, so areas that have statewide planning goal protections associated with them, or in areas that where the infrastructure would not support that level of density. And right now, it appears that both the LCD staff and many of the RAC members are really leaning toward the whittle away approach. And there's a meeting later this week where the TAC, the model code TAC, will be talking about whether there should be other opportunities to whittle away other than the goal protected areas and infrastructure constraints. So I think that's just kind of my quick high-level overview of what's happening at this state level. After the presentation, I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunity for questions if folks have questions, but I'll turn it back over to Terry.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, I'm glad we were able to get you on. These next two slides talked about the policy and project context within which we're implementing this House bill. So the way that housing planning is done in Oregon and in the city of Eugene specifically, we have an adopted consolidated plan, which was just finished. It directs the city on how to use federal dollars. We also have, like, from CDBG and other federal sources. We also have a fair housing plan that guides local implementation and compliance with fair housing law. And then we all are familiar, or at least hopefully have heard of the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan. So this is our local comprehensive plan. It's partially complete. We began it when we were looking at our new urban growth boundary and adopted several chapters in 2017. And they are the urban growth boundary chapter, economic development, the whole transportation system plan is a part of our comprehensive plan. And there are policies on growth monitoring. Currently, though, housing policy lives in the Metro Plan, which is a regional document. So we are proposing that with this project, we adopt a new housing chapter to provide local policy guidance that aligns with the requirements of the House bill. In terms of projects, there's a list here of housing projects currently underway and recently completed. It's a pretty long list. Here's a sampling. There are also numerous housing programs that are administered by the city, including the land banking program, which results in the construction of affordable housing developments, often featuring middle housing types like Willackenzie Crossing, Turtle Creek, shown here in the little salmon-colored row house, and others. And we have a new construction excise tax that is collected and then allocated through recommendations of a committee. Yeah, that's the next one. Okay. Sorry for the small type on this one. This graph is included in your packet. It's part of the public involvement plan, and it's a summary or a snapshot of the implementation project timeline. We have 4 phases. Basically, a phase where we're creating a public involvement plan and general project approach. A phase where we're working with consultants to develop design and code concepts, a phase of code writing and reviews of drafts, and then finally an adoption phase. And this should look familiar to those of you who've been on the commission for a little while because it's modeled after the clear and objective standards, graphic, and process. So below those 4 phases, you've got a sampling of what the public engagement strategies are proposed to be for each phase. And then at the very bottom, the key product for that phase. Oh, I wanted to point one thing out. As part of phase 2, while we're starting to look at how to really implement this bill, it will include some in-house or consultant economic analysis and then some public works department infrastructure capacity analysis. And the purpose of these analyses is to answer questions such as how much middle housing is likely to be built after Eugene implements this law, or what's sort of the range of what we can expect in terms of amount of infill. across the city? And do we have infrastructure system capacity to serve this expected growth? If not, where are those pinch points and how do we plan to address those issues? So I've mentioned a couple times we'll be working with a consultant. We did have a full slate of work in the planning division before the House bill passed. And so we've been lucky to receive some grant money from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And we intend to use that to increase our capacity effectively by hiring consultants to help us write the code. And these are their main work products. So first, a context study of general neighborhood patterns to see kind of how we might want to propose implementing the law in different areas, broadly described here as historic grid neighborhoods, suburban expansion areas, and hilly areas. They will create design and code concepts, such as the drawing here, that's a row house design concept, and outreach materials to share with the public and all stakeholders, anybody who's interested, what the proposals are starting to look like. Then there will be a code framework, and this is like an annotated outline of the code sections that would be required to comply with the law and implement that into our own land use code. And then the last product from the consultant side is really a draft that then, a comprehensive draft in the right format that would match our code, and for both code and policy that city staff would then take through the public hearing process at the Planning Commission and City Council level. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sophie, who is just a couple doors down from me. She shouldn't have any issues, but knock on wood, she'll walk us through the public involvement plan. Sophie.
All right, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Terry. These are unprecedented times. COVID-19 has completely changed the world we live in and the way we work. And at the same time, our country is experiencing powerful messages and efforts regarding the Black Lives Matter movement. Both will have an impact on our messaging and how we engage with the community. We are now living in a pandemic, and current health recommendations prohibit our usual large in-person gatherings. This means that our engagement will shift to include mostly virtual opportunities to engage, a challenge and an opportunity for the city to expand who we can hear from. Efforts such as the Healthy Democracy Panel, online forums, use of social media, mobile-friendly webpage design, and new creative tactics will be used. Ultimately, the project team is committed to an inclusive approach that removes barriers and results in community-wide participation. We recognize that this approach is new and will be imperfect, and we'll be learning and adjusting along the way. Then there's the intersection of this project and the Black Lives Matter movement. To move forward, we must first look back and acknowledge actions in the past that have harmed and excluded members of our community. We cannot talk about zoning without talking about race and exclusion. Residential zoning has a complex history that resulted in exclusion of low-income, Black, Indigenous, and people of color from certain neighborhoods. In Oregon, this history was especially harmful, with direct exclusion of non-white people from the state from 1844 until 1926. And although those exclusions are illegal today, their negative impacts are still affecting our community through the legacy of exclusionary zoning. Housing policy and code changes are an opportunity to mitigate those. A component of the public involvement plan will be to educate the public about this history and the connection between housing policy, zoning, and equity. These efforts will include hosting historical information on the project webpage, linking to relevant books such as Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law in the Eugene Public Library, and linking to resources detailing Eugene's specific history with white supremacy and exclusion of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We also plan on hosting community conversations with local experts and organizations on social media that discuss the effects of exclusionary zoning. Our profession's history is harmful, and its future is dependent on righting our wrongs and committing to change. Revising our land use code to comply with House Bill 2001 will shape how our community develops and expand opportunities for where people can choose to live and what type of home they can live in. We have the opportunity to use land use code changes to make our neighborhoods more inclusive and more equitable for everyone to enjoy. And next slide, please.
Okay, I'm jumping in here because I actually can't hear Sophie. It's the weirdest thing. I'm trying to read your lips. So when you want the next slide, just okay.
With all that being said, let's talk about public engagement strategies and who we aim to engage. Of course, it all starts with boards and commissions. That includes the Planning Commission, Sustainability Commission, Human Rights Commission, Budget Committee, Historic Review Board, Active Transportation Committee, and the Housing Policy Board. The Planning Commission will have a key role in this project. After we develop implementation options, the Planning Commission will review land use code amendments and make your recommendation to City Council, who will make the final decision. Before that, we plan on hosting several local partner roundtables, which will include a variety of partners, such as leaders in the communities from Black, Indigenous, and people of color identified groups, Eugene Springfield Renters Alliance, and GLAAD, formerly the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. And then, of course, we plan on engaging with the general public. As I've mentioned, due to COVID-19, we will rely primarily on online engagement strategies. This includes a project webpage that will host information and resources, Engage Eugene, which will host online open houses, presentations, surveys, question and answers, and emailed city newsletters. Then we are going to have to get creative and innovative. We will use social media that will build on our current presence and expand to include live videos, Twitter, Instagram, and forums. We also plan on creating materials like the City of Minneapolis's Meeting in a Box, which is creating printable digital meeting materials for local organizations, neighborhood associations, and other interested parties to provide feedback on the project without having staff present or having to attend a public meeting. Tools like this are new, but we have seen their success in other places, and we hope that this makes the information more accessible for a broader range of community members. Okay, next slide. Great, thanks, Terry. A key component of our engagement of the general public is going to be our Healthy Democracy panel. In December, we were joined by Lynn Davis in a work session where we presented the organization and how we think we can work with them for House Bill 2001 implementation. Details are not finalized. However, we are planning on collaborating with Healthy Democracy for this project. The Climate Action Plan's use of the Equity Panel and the Housing Tools and Strategies project created an example and a model for ways we can equitably engage the public. We are aiming to build on work we've already done and will be partnering with human rights and neighborhood involvement and sustainability to utilize their expertise and experiment with innovative ways to get more perspectives in our community involved. This project will pilot a curated group of Eugene community members who are representative of the general population and will be compensated for their time at 2 points in the process. This component is intended to produce an equity lens and equity considerations for decision-making processes relevant to the project. Everyone in our community is affected by and has a unique perspective on housing. And by incorporating the panel's work in addition to that of boards, commissions, and the public, we aim to have a process that addresses the needs of our entire community. The city is still in conversation about the makeup of the steering committee, the exact process, and the resources needed to virtually execute the project. We are hoping to bring our Healthy Democracy proposal to you next month before it goes to council, and are looking forward to hearing your feedback about the project.
So this is the craziest thing. I'm lucky that we've been working on this, so I think I know what Sophie said, but I didn't hear any of it. We just have two more slides. So next steps for the Planning Commission and for this process are for staff to work with our purchasing department to issue a request for proposals to get a consultant on board to help us with the code writing. To refine the Healthy Democracy proposal that Sophie was just talking to you about and incorporate your input and see if we can't work with them and you all to get to a place where we feel good about proposing a specific process to the City Council. And that will happen, City Council presentation on July 22nd. We'll also bring them the public involvement plan and incorporate their input before asking you to approve it. And with that, we are ready for your questions and discussion. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you guys. That was great. I have a couple people in the queue. I've put myself in the queue as well, but I'll wait until everybody else has a chance. So Commissioner
I
Taylor,
can't hear anyone now.
I have you first. You cannot hear us, Terry? Okay. Let's see. We'll try to fix this. Sophie, are you still with us? Where are you? Oh, there you are. You're near Terry, correct? Do you want to let her know that? Okay. Sounds like she's trying to figure this out. I want to make sure she can hear the questions. So let's just pause a moment. Maybe she can do the same thing and whatever Lauren was able to do to get back to us. I want to make sure Terry can hear the questions that are being asked. So I'll have Commissioner Taylor first and then Commissioner Borofsky's next. So I'm just having you all prepare in the queue. Oh.
I can hear y'all now.
You can. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yay.
Well, at least you can hear me because I'm the only one talking. So, so we've got Commissioner Taylor followed by Commissioner Borofsky. So we'll go ahead and go to Kristen.
My question is for Lauren, and it's a fairly simple question. So you were talking about DLCD's minimum standards, and I just wanted to ask you, do they have, I think you had said this, but do they have drafts in accessible places on their website, or does the city of Eugene have links to those drafts?
Commissioner Taylor, yes. Well, qualified, yes. So there are, DLCD broke up its consideration of the model code and minimum standards into two pieces. They did kind of all their work on duplexes first, because that applies specifically to smaller jurisdictions and they have a shorter deadline to implement the duplex code, and they only have to do duplexes. And then DLCD has just recently turned its attention to the other middle housing types that apply to the larger jurisdictions. So we have to implement duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, et cetera. So in terms of the model code and minimum standards that apply to duplexes, they are fairly complete, and they are drafted in a way that looks like code language and looks like administrative rule language. And they are, I'm not sure if they are kind of available on their own on the DLCD website, but they certainly are available. Sophie's nodding yes, as part of those RAC meeting packets. And I'll look to Sophie and Terry. Maybe that is something that we could link to on our website as well. In terms of the, Sophie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so on our middle housing webpage, we do have everything linked to DLCD. We explain to the public, what's going on, outside of city staff right now. If anybody wants me to send them a specific link to all of the agenda meeting materials, I can do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophie. And then Commissioner Taylor, to kind of finish answering your question, the model code and minimum standards for the higher middle housing types are in process right now. There are materials related to them in the RAC packets and the model code TAC packets, but they're not, it's just sort of conceptual language at this point. It's not framed as model code language or administrative rule language yet. So we're still, we have some ideas about where they're going, but it's still a little bit up in the air about a bunch of the minimum standards that will apply to us because we don't have that exact language yet.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren. It really, where my question is coming from is obviously it sounds somewhat complicated. And I think having it on our website with some links, it's great to hear, Sophie, just so that people that do want to get involved or get more informed, that they have maybe a little bit of direction of how to access these documents. So I think it's great. Sounds great.
Okay. Great, thank you. Commissioner Borofsky.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Lauren, I think, to start off with. I guess one of my first questions is, on page 3 of our AIS, there's a thing that talks about the missing middle housing code amendment project will develop land use codes that will better align with our local needs and visions than defaulting to the state model. Then it goes on to say the primary goal will be to provide housing opportunities for more community members. If we haven't got the code from the state, how do we know that ours is going to be better aligned? And how do we know that the primary goal of providing more housing would be achieved with our code as opposed to the state one? Because sometimes our input from our community members may actually limit what may happen and may not provide more access. So that's one question. The second question I have is, in House Bill 2001, there's the discouraged development clause. And I'm just wondering who and how that process will go forward. Is that going to have to go through a full LCDC appeal process? If somebody looks at our code that we go into and says, I believe this discourages development, is it going to be a cumbersome and expensive process? If you could just speak to that, that would be helpful.
Sure. I'll address your second question, Commissioner Borowski, and I'll maybe look to Terry and Alyssa to talk more about your first question. But in terms of the clause that you're talking about, I think you were talking about section, I'll just read it. Local governments may regulate siting and design of middle housing, provided that the regulations do not individually or cumulatively discourage the development of all middle housing types through unreasonable costs or delay. I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but so DLCD, as part of their rulemaking process and as part of setting up of these minimum standards, is proposing to define unreasonable cost or delay in terms of the development of these middle housing types. So what would constitute unreasonable cost or delay? They have done so for duplexes, and the outcome of that is what I mentioned before, which is DLCD has basically said anything that would make it harder to develop a duplex than it is to develop a single family home constitutes unreasonable cost and delay, at least for the purpose of duplexes. In terms of the other middle housing types, that definition may change. We're not sure. They're still working through what that looks like for the quote unquote higher middle housing types. So, but I think it's highly likely that we will have a rule from DLCD that tells us what constitutes unreasonable cost or delay. Whether that will mean there are no LUBA appeals of our specific code provisions, I can't say. Certainly without the rule, it would be a case-by-case appeal, just like you've seen with a bunch of our clear and objective standards, where a developer says, in this case, this isn't clear and objective, or this would cause me unreasonable cost and delay, and it would be specific to the facts and circumstances of that particular development. With this rule, we will certainly have more guidance from DLCD about what they think those parameters are, but I would expect that there probably still will be some appeals.
So for duplexes then, basically any duplex would be permitted, and if we wouldn't be able to put any types of design or those things in, because what you just told me was if somebody said, well, that's going to cost me more or delay me by using those code interpretations, you couldn't do it.
I mean, basically, the rules haven't been adopted yet, but what's being proposed, and I don't have the definition right in front of me, but yes, if a single family home is an outright permitted use in a zone, then a duplex would also need to be an outright permitted use in a zone. If the single family home can be built to a certain height, that height requirement can't be lower for a duplex. If you can have a certain amount of lot coverage for a single family home, that can't be smaller for a duplex. So that is kind of what DLCD is thinking right now. Terry, you're still muted. Oh, there you go.
Oh, now I'm not. Somebody magically is unmuting people. So your question about timing, really, how do we know our local code that we start working on would be better and better aligned with our goals than the model code? We have been thinking about that question a lot and have been trying to lay out our process and timeline so that we wait for the minimum standards and the model code to be available before we propose anything. So it's kind of, let's see how it goes is the approach we need to take. But at the same time, they have not moved the deadline. We need to spend our grant money and have our code adopted by June 2020. We need to spend our grant money by next summer and then have our code adopted by the following summer. So we need to get going and at the same time, make sure that our process pays attention to everything that's being developed at the state level and brings that in to the discussions that we're having with everyone.
Okay, and then is there anything that says we can't do it faster than June 30th, 2022? I know that there's a lot of people in this committee that, or in this community, that would like to see this happen at an accelerated pace.
No, I think it's just a matter of doing a thorough job and incorporating all of the feedback that we get at every step. But that is a fair question and is part of the feedback we're looking from you as far as the timeline and public involvement plan that's laid out in there. So that's what we're proposing right now. And we're open to feedback.
Okay. Thank you, guys. I have Commissioner Fragla next in the queue, followed by Commissioner Beeson.
Great, thank you. I'm curious, is there an approval process at the state level where we have to submit our compliant code recommendations that we decide upon and what that might look like? Or maybe there's nothing?
That's a great question, Commissioner Fragla. Yes, and I think is the answer. So there is a process that we go through every time we adopt a land use code amendment. We have to notify DLCD. We send them our proposed amendment. We go through our own local adoption process, and then we send them the whatever it is that we actually end up adopting. And that process includes the possibility of them providing us with comments. Normally, it's if they think, you know, what we're proposing doesn't comply with the statewide planning goals. I'm a little, I have to admit, I'm a little unsure exactly how the process will work differently, if it will work differently for these House Bill 2001 amendments. Listening to the RAC and TAC meetings, it does seem to me that DLCD staff is under the impression that they will be able to not only give us comments, but perhaps almost even intervene in our process if they feel like what we're proposing does not comply with House Bill 2001. But I haven't seen that in kind of the general land use adoption process. And as far as I know, I haven't seen them proposing a different process right now. So I do think that they will be involved in some way. I think that they have some kind of authority to say that what we're proposing does or does not comply with House Bill 2001, whether that looks like a LUBA appeal or an enforcement order or something else, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. Commissioner Fragla, you got your question answered? Okay. I'm going to move on to Commissioner Ramey. Commissioner Ramey, you are muted. You will have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, how about that? Okay, sorry. So I thought Commissioner Beeson was next, so I'm like half awake here. These are excellent questions. Thank you all. I really focused my review on the participation piece of it because there's a lot of questions. I thought if we could really focus, or at least I spent my time focusing on that. And these are questions probably for Sophie and Terry. When you design these kind of processes, thinking about who's going to be participating and when, one of the questions you want to ask is, well, what are the issues that are likely to come up? And so in your experience as planners and process managers, I mean, I can think of, well, everybody's going to say, how does this affect my livability? How many cars are going to park in front of my house? And how much more traffic is there going to be? And so we can design a process that includes addressing those kinds of issues to be sure we have data and experts at the right time during the process. So in your experience, with your opinion, what are the hot button issues? What are the things that are likely to come up so we can be sure the process is going to match up as best we can imagine?
I anticipate we will hear a variety of concerns and advocacy from a variety of different viewpoints in this process because we've already been hearing it. So yes, issues of concern around additional infill, also issues of concern that the city might not fully implement the law and that we might take an approach that doesn't maximize the access to opportunity to live in middle housing types. And so I think we'll hear both. And I think it's a great reminder for us to have those issues on our radar and include information and data and plans and policies that interact with this project and have that as part of our educational materials and outreach materials as we go along. I don't know, Sophie, if you want to add anything. You did mention parking, Chris. I know that's going to be one of them. I think the distinction between balloon approach or whittle away approach, and the more we know about that, I think that will be a big topic that people will want to discuss. In fact, people have been discussing it quite a bit in the River Road Corridor Study. I noticed that we have one of the Community Advisory Committee members attending and listening to this meeting. And they had a meeting a few nights ago where they were asking all of those same questions. How is the development of minimum standards going to impact our plan? We've been planning for additional housing in River Road for a couple of years now. And one of the answers is we're going to have to do what we can to align those processes. And we didn't know, for instance, about the minimum standards development until a couple of months ago. So all of these are pretty active issues for the River Road process in particular. And as we start rolling out our outreach to the rest of the community, I'm sure there will be concerns and opportunities raised for all parts of the community. Anything to add, Sophie?
Okay, it's a great question. I'm going to apologize to Commissioner Beeson because you were next in the queue and your hand was lowered. So next is Commissioner Beeson, followed by Commissioner Taylor.
Okay, can you hear me? I've unmuted myself. I think you can hear me. Okay. I have a comment. I also not kind of focused in on the public involvement plan, but it was hard for me not to want to get into the kind of the project plan or the view of the implementation of the House Bill 2001. First off, I think I want to say I appreciate what you've put together as the plan. I think it's going to be really thorough. I appreciate how you're trying to reach out and include a good cross-section of the community, all the various interest groups, the work you're doing to reach out in an equitable fashion, everything that you've got in the background and everything you talked about today. I think I would also say it strikes me as very ambitious. There's definitely going to be a lot of people involved, a lot of groups involved. So I'm interested as it goes forward over the next several months, as there are iterations of it, and we can begin to see some more detail about how you're going to set up some of these and how you're going to connect with these various groups. And I think at the end of the day, looking for giving people in the community the opportunity to learn about what we're doing, to engage or to understand, to provide input, to feel like they're heard, for you on the city side, for us to be incorporating all of that into everything we're doing, and all the iterations of that. I'm kind of interested in how that's going to go, and want to be able to kind of follow that along. I can see where some of the parts are still under development, as you've talked about with the healthy democracy work and so on. And but all of it, I think, looks good to me, and I appreciate it. One of the places it took me, I found myself, at the end of the day, there are some deliverables. There are some things that we're going to need to accomplish by the middle of 2022. I guess I would comment, I think it would be great to do it faster. I've assumed we could maybe do it faster. I found myself thinking that might be kind of hard with everything we're going to attempt to do. In any event, we don't need to flesh it out right now, but I found myself thinking about the implementation package at the end, which is kind of my want as I go through things. And so I'm assuming we're going to end up with a set of code amendments, a set of findings, some sort of overall ordinance on top of that, legal memorandum. Soon there'll be other memoranda from city, maybe Public Works and others, stuff that would go into a final package that would be for the council. And even preceding that, a package that's going to be for the Planning Commission and is going to need to be part of what would be a package for people to review in public hearings. And I say all of that to, it seems like a lot of that would need to be substantially complete, maybe 5 or 6 months before. I'm kind of guessing. I know you guys have kind of thought about it. So I kind of looked at your schedule and I see the adoption phase is about 6 months. I think I'm going to be interested as you do successive work plans and you begin to lay this out and begin to set in place some of the specific deliverables and the dates for those. One of the things, and I've got kind of a question here, I'm assuming you talk about, well, there's a couple of things. One, you talk about completing the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan, which will take the place of what we now have in the Metro plan. So I'm presuming that's part of the final package. It kind of raised a question for me. If we do anything at all to the Metro plan, I'm assuming that means there has to be an action by the city and Springfield and the county of revising the Metro plan. So that's maybe a bit of a question. Also, all of the other plans that we have that are kind of part of this, the refinement plans. And I'm curious if you guys have any kind of feel for whether or not refinement plans around the city are going to need to be adjusted as we do it. So I'll just kind of stop there or throw that out. I'm kind of interested in how how that all looks as we're gonna, as we do this over the next couple of years and how we finish it up.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up both the Metro Plan, the housing chapter, and the refinement plans. I neglected to read part of my notes that talked about that. So back when I showed the zoning map and I talked about how we would be creating zoning code amendments for the different zones, we will also need to amend refinement plans that conflict with the House bill. And we haven't finished that work yet of identifying what the amendments will need to be, but we know that we will need to do that. And the Metro Plan also contains a low density residential land use designation. And it has a density range that may also need to be amended as we do our work and figure out what our code is going to look like. We will likely need to amend that Metro Plan designation and bring that into the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan in the new housing chapter or a separate chapter. So about that, yes, the housing chapter would be accomplished as an amendment to the Metro Plan. This is what we did when we adopted other chapters of the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan. It was a big package. And our city attorney friends help us get the ordinances right and the order of action correct when there's more than one jurisdiction involved. We also already have a draft of that housing chapter completed, and it's not a huge document. It's maybe, I hesitate to say, but probably about in the realm of 5 or 6 pages. And what we intend to do is dust it off, update it, and bring it through this process so it can match. It can provide a policy framework and direction for the code work that will then implement it, if that makes sense.
It does.
You had another question I was gonna
Let me just
answer.
pop in really quick about the Metro Plan. If we're making changes that are specific just to the city of Eugene, we actually don't need to involve Springfield or Lane County. So if we're adding a policy or saying that a policy no longer applies to Eugene, it won't be multiple jurisdictions involved in that decision. So based on everything we know at this point, we think these are only city of Eugene decisions, but the code's only going to apply within the city limits. Lauren can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm at this point fairly certain that everything is just going to be city of Eugene.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And I think when I kind of look at what you have for a schedule now, it appears like it can all be done. I assume you all think that too. I'm just noting there's a lot of parts and pieces. There's a lot of coordination with a variety of entities locally and statewide. So I have one other, I think I'll hold my other question maybe for a second round. And I have one other, so.
Okay, great. Commissioner Beeson, if you want to raise your hand again, I'll put you in the queue. And along those same lines, I'm going to let Commissioner Baker go next, if that's okay. And then Commissioner Taylor, I'll come back to you for a second round. So
I think I interrupted Terry, so she may have something to finish off with.
Okay, perfect.
I'm done as long as you had all your questions answered, Ken.
I do. I have one other to talk about, but it'll probably take 2 or 3 minutes. I can wait till the second round.
Okay, perfect. So Commissioner Baker, go ahead and you're in the queue. Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me all right? Okay, good, great. I was wondering, right now we have a set of requirements that have been adopted by the legislature, and the LCD is actively working on developing these model codes. We have a new legislature coming in next year, and they have the capability of changing some of those requirements, sort of changing the goalposts midstream, some of them, because again, there may be some feedback from some parts of the Oregon community that want certain aspects of it modified slightly. Do we have any feel for, are there any amendments proposed that we're aware are coming down the pike? In other words, what is the likelihood that you're going to have to be, you might have some of these goalposts changed during the process before 2012 when this adoption is required?
I'll jump in, and anyone else who has more knowledge than me, feel free. But Commissioner Baker, it's a great question. It certainly is possible. I'm not currently aware of any proposals that would substantially change the goalposts. I think it wouldn't be crazy to think that the legislature might decide to give cities more time given the COVID pandemic, but I also think they might not. So that's kind of what I know right now, which is very little.
Okay. And my other question is a general one, and it's mainly about, there's a lot of stakeholders in the list of stakeholders and a lot of public outreach, and you have democracy, you have the democracy group, you have the consultants. It seems like a very challenging project in terms of coordinating all these entities and the public input and getting that information assembled reasonably. Is there any, do you have any overriding supervisory structure that you're kind of helping to put in place to manage this extensive large team, so to speak? In other words, it seems to me like you probably need to spend a lot of time figuring out how you're going to get all these people to work together well, so, and oversee that continues to happen. So, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of groups and stakeholders and people interested in how we implement this law. I would liken it a bit to the process we are almost about to enter into the adoption phase for, and that is clear and objective standards. A similar array of interested stakeholders. What's different about this one, of course, is that there's a state law that's very specific and very prescriptive about what we need to implement. And so, although public interest is very high and everyone is very interested in how it's going to be applied, we aren't yet at the point of knowing that, since there's so much work being done, a lot of balls up in the air at the state level. That being said, we have been talking about these issues in Eugene for 20 plus years, and we have a lot of background to start from, including clear and objective, but also back to infill compatibility standards and all of the current work that's going on with the River Road Corridor study. So I guess I'm optimistic that we will be able to take the public input and within the context of the parameters set by the law, our goal is to do the best job possible of incorporating where we can the suggestions of the public. That being said, you asked about structures. We do have a policy team within planning that's overseeing the project work, and that's Alyssa, Gabe Flock, and myself. So we're the planning policy team. We've also been talking about having a steering committee that would oversee the healthy democracy process. And that's a detail we don't have worked out yet, but it's something that we feel would be important in order to get confidence that that part of the project is moving in the right direction.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to step in really quick, just jump in with one basic question, and then we'll go to round two. My question, so Sophie, your component of the presentation I was really especially interested in, because having had the fair housing training presentation, which I think most of you were on the commission when we had that. If not, I would highly recommend watching that presentation. We know that there are just a lot of things in our code that are discriminatory, and they've been there a long time, and we just have never gone in, and this is, I'm looking forward to this opportunity to kind of clean that up. But I'm wondering if any of you happen to know if the state at the level that DLCD is looking to come up with the model code, are they looking at some of those very specific things as well? Or I'm just kind of curious if anybody knows.
So I'll jump in and then let Sophie chime in as well, because I know she's been listening to a bunch of the same meetings. At the state level, they definitely are looking at things through an equity lens. I mean, that is something that is very important to both DLCD staff and to the members of the RAC. And it's been kind of a through line of all of the discussion of the rulemaking around House Bill 2001. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay. No, that's great. That's really helpful. So that was my main question. Most of everything else has been addressed. So I'll go back to Commissioner Taylor, followed by Commissioner Ramey.
So I have 3 questions. 2 of them are fairly quick, but I'll just list the 3 questions. They have different responders. So the first, I wanted to thank Sophie. I think your presentation was really comprehensive, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness. And I think it's great. I mean, public, we do get a lot of public feedback in terms of the public participation process. And I know COVID has presented a layer of challenge because it's a different platform to outreach effectively to the community. So I think it's great you've reached out to other communities to try to understand how to do that more effectively. Not only for just active participation, but also focusing on the diversity and making sure equity is present. So I love that Terry said that you're considering a team to kind of focus on healthy democracy and equity. I think to basically add that layer to ensure that in this next step, we don't perpetuate some of the past. So thank you very much. I like what Commissioner Beeson said. It would be great. I don't know if it's possible. I don't want you staff to have additional time that they spend like giving Planning Commission summaries necessarily. But if you can just send us a link or something, or let us know, hey, can you check out the updates of the public process so that we can then plug in and be accountable for staying up to date. I would appreciate that. So that's just more of an overarching kind of comment. Thank you. So the other 2 pieces are, 1, refinement plan policies and the need to update some of those refinement plan policies. I definitely spend time in the refinement plans, so I don't know other planning commissions. I can definitely send you a few that I have noted most recently. And even as I'm working in refinement plans, to kind of put just a note out and just tell me who to send those to, because I know you've got a lot of work in front of you. So just let us know if Planning Commission can help with that. And the third one is for Lauren. So explain, you might have already said this, but there's this nuance obviously between duplexes and then the higher middle housing for the larger jurisdictions. I'm just curious, is there a tiered adoption process? So because we're a larger jurisdiction, do we get until June 2022 to adopt everything? Or does the duplex piece of it, is that actually starting to be enforced at the end of this year?
Great question, Commissioner Taylor. As a larger jurisdiction, we have until June 30th, 2022 to adopt the entire package. There are some smaller jurisdictions that are only required to adopt the duplex piece, and they have an earlier deadline of June 30, 2021. But our deadline is for everything.
Great.
All right. Next is Commissioner Ramey.
So Tiffany, can you just I'd love to hear from either Sophie or Terry about our refinement plan, if there's anything we can do, like additional homework, that's helpful, and who our comments should go to.
Okay.
Thanks, Kristen. I would love any information that you've found, and you're one of our Planning Commission resources on this project. So that's a nice structure to take advantage of you can send them to both Sophie and myself.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll follow up with an email.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Ramey, followed by Commissioner Beeson.
Is it me now? So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between equality and equity as I've started to think about it over the last year or so. And I think it's important for this effort and our moment in time, because there is a difference between equality and equity, I think. And I'm going to try to give you an imperfect analogy that you probably all heard, but it's about a group of people standing at a fence, and the taller people can see over the fence, and the sort of middle people can't, and the shorter people can't either. But everyone is treated equally. They're all given a step stool of the same height. So now the taller people can see over, the middle people can see over, but the shorter people still can't see over. So that's an equal treatment. To me, the equity piece of it is understanding that everybody gets the stepping stool that's the right height, so you can all see over the fence at the end of the day. It's not an equal size stepping stool. Some of them are going to be different because we're starting from different points. So how that imperfect, I'm sorry for that example, relates to where we are today is that I think a lot of these groups who are hoping to engage are not typically engaged in the planning process. And so they're again, back to my imperfect analogy, their stepping stool needs to be taller. And I think what that means is that it's more than just sending them an email, like, come to this meeting. It's, you know, it's a follow-up phone call. It's, I don't know, pizza at their meeting, whatever it takes. But I think when I look at this list on your process, it's page 7. It's in the mid 80s in the overall package. But it's the usual cast of characters, beginning with us, City of Eugene Planning Commission. So, and it's a very long list. So one thing that I was struck by immediately, well, even if you just simply reversed the order of that list and said, hey, the people who were typically these, it looks like, I know you probably didn't do this, but it looks like as you went down, okay, here's the usual half a dozen people we always talk to. Well, who should we add to this process because of its specific nature? It's the way it's laid out. And those are the people that are down at the bottom of the list. Well, those are the people that are not typically accessing these processes. So those are the people that we need to add some extra layer of invitations, information, welcomes. And you talked about the extra kits you have, the meeting in the box, the use of social media, the staff online, one-on-one, drop-in offices. All of that I think is terrific. And I think that's a good start. But I would like us to be aware of people who don't normally intersect with the process. And the idea that, well, we can treat them all equally. We put you on the list and you're all there bulleted. Well, no. I think we need an approach where the people, some of those people on that list are going to need a lot more prompting and handholding. And at this point is now the time to say, well, let's take the resource for the Planning Commission. Okay, they just get an email. But these people down here at the bottom, they're going to get a phone call. I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to stand on the street corner, whatever that is, so we can just kind of target our resources strategically and put more on people who don't normally engage in the process. Because in order to give them the opportunity to engage, we need to send them more information. So I don't know if that's a question or a request or just a chance for me to make it feel like I spent my time wisely today. But in any case, thank you for thinking about that. And when I think about equity, I think about, well, let's be sure at the end of the day, everybody can see over the fence.
Thank you so much. I'll let Sophie jump in too if she has something to add, but you're getting at really the heart of what we're trying to do with both the whole public involvement plan. You might have noticed a new section on equity and inclusion that's new and it's intentional. And the other piece that's just not quite ready for your review is the Healthy Democracy panel itself. And I really think that is where we're trying to not only remove barriers and reach out to folks that maybe underrepresented in our projects, but actually proactively create a community jury that is representative of all of us and just invite them and compensate them in a way we haven't really done before. And so we've started this process with the equity panel. I know Sophie talked about some of this when I couldn't hear, so I don't want to repeat what she said, but that's exactly right. We talk about the difference between equality and equity, and we use that example, and we're very well supported by our staff in the Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement Office in doing better and continually finding ways to bring equity and access to our planning work. It's really kind of a perfect time and opportunity to do that, given where we are. We have extra challenges, but I think we also have extra opportunities. So thank you for those thoughts.
I would say thank you as well. And, you know, with this project, it's not just about the design of a duplex. You know, I think a lot about how I try to explain to people why I'm a planner, you know, and it's not just because I like to read development code, it's because, you know, intentional actions like planning shape our community and shape opportunities for people in our community. And especially with this project, this is going to affect, you know, kids that are in school right now, like where they live and where they have opportunity as they grow up. Where we are planning on having community conversations. It's still being fleshed out, but you know, hosting conversations with local experts to talk about the greater effects of planning and specifically residential zoning. And so we will have, you know, hopefully a panel about race and equity and zoning, how climate is affected by zoning, how transportation and transit planning are affected by zoning. And so I really hope to get the conversation out, especially in a time where people are really looking for answers for, like, where can we make changes that will contribute to the equity in our communities. So hopefully by the end of this, more people will know why we want to hear their voices in planning and why it's so important.
Good. Well, terrific. And I just want to be sure, I think maybe I said page 7, it's page 9 on your, of the long list of, I think there's stakeholders, boards, commissions, and local partners. It was that list, and kind of that was what struck me looking at that list, saying, well, this is the usual cast of characters. How can we treat this differently? So thanks.
Okay, I've got 3 of you still in the queue, and we've got 15 minutes. So, and I'm assuming staff may have some updates afterwards. So I'm gonna ask you to please try to be brief, just to get us out on time. I have another meeting I have to jump onto. I apologize. So Commissioner Beeson, followed by Commissioner Borowski.
Okay, thanks. And I'll try to be quick. I have a question and maybe a comment if I can fit it in. I have a specific question. There's the section of the House Bill 13, section 13 talks about existing restriction provisions. And I guess my question, I read that a few times, and I read all the staff material. I guess I'm curious if is there residential property around Eugene that may be exempt from this bill? Are there existing restriction provisions in deeds out there? And I'm looking for a very general, quick answer. You know, do we know about that kind of stuff, and does it exist?
So Commissioner Beeson, I'll jump in quickly. No property in Eugene would be exempt from our code provisions. So our code would apply to all properties in town. However, there may be some properties with existing CC&Rs or HOA agreements wherein a group of property owners have contracted among themselves to say that they would only develop their property with single family homes, for example. If someone wanted to come and get a permit from us to build a duplex on that property, we would give it to them. But they may be risking a lawsuit from their neighbors for violating the pre-existing contract. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Okay, good. Thanks. I guess this, instead of a comment, the only other thing I'd like to say quickly, I'm very interested in this I'm very interested in this particular piece of work. And so I'm kind of assuming that as you guys flesh out the work plan even more, there will be additional meetings with the Planning Commission over the next, and this would be prior to any public hearing that we have out at the end of the day prior to taking a recommendation to council. But I'm subject to, I guess, agreement from my colleagues here, but I think it would be good for us to be able to talk about this a couple of times as it goes along.
Absolutely, that's our intent, and thank you for that. You are
Okay.
the city Citizen Involvement Committee, and so that's the role that you're being asked to play partially as we talk with you about the public involvement plan, and then you eventually approve it. That's one of your roles, but you're also the city's committee that liaises between the community and the planning department. So we will use you as much as we can, but projects on your agendas and amongst the other projects that need your attention.
All right, thanks very much.
Okay, I have got Commissioner Brodsky and then followed by Commissioner Baker, and that's my cue. So I'll let you to finish us out. So Commissioner Brodsky, go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that I would like to stress for the public involvement plan is making sure that whoever's participating and we're getting input from has a set of sideboards that are there, basically from the rack. You know, if we've got rules that we see that are coming down, letting people know that, you know, there are rules that are coming down that we can't really go past. I see this a lot as a planning commissioner when dealing with the public. You know, people will say, well, why don't you do this? And it's like, well, I can't because there's a code, you know, there's a code provision or this or that. So if there are set rules, can you still hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay. If there's set rules that we can't go beyond, making that clear to the participants early on so that they don't get the feeling that what they're saying is not being heard, because it's not that they're not being heard, it's just we hear them, but we can't act on those rules. And so sometimes they feel alienated by that. I see that in correspondence we get all the time. Why don't you do this, this, and this? And it makes it hard because it's like, well, because we can't, because of this code provision or because of this and that. So as soon as we know what the rules are going to be from the RAC or the TAC, try to implement those into some sideboards so that when you go to a community presentation, you say, you know, I can't, for example, with the duplex, I can't regulate the height lower than a single family one, or so that people who are not familiar with writing code can kind of get that idea. And then the second thing, when it goes to refinement plans, as we start digging into the refinement plans, I think it'll be very important to let the people who are affected by those refinement plans be made aware of it. And that's kind of tough, you know, because some refinement plans aren't specific to a specific neighborhood association or whatever, but geographically, if there's a refinement plan and it looks like there's going to be some changes to it, please try and reach out to whoever you have contacts in that area so that they're not blindsided by, hey, we worked a long time to get this refinement plan implemented. It took us 7 years and it was 20 years ago. Well, there may be some needs for updating, but yet just because it needs updating, please involve the people who are affected by it.
Anyone response, or should we move on? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Commissioner Brodsky. Last, we have Commissioner Baker, and then I'll send it back to staff for updates. So go ahead, Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I have two quick things I just wanted to mention. One's a question. there are a number of restrictive covenants on existing properties that would prohibit these rules affecting those properties. And we don't really know where those are in Eugene. I've seen some areas in Portland where they've been mapped out, but it would be helpful to have maps that showed where these restrictive covenants in place, because they're sort of all over certain developments after a certain period of time. I don't know when, but it was clearly by the 1940s, because I'm aware of some of these in Portland, where when they developed a subdivision, they put a restrictive covenant on it that that would limit what could be done under these new rules. So anyway, I just mentioned that it would be useful for the community to know where those areas are. So we have that. And my other question is, we have this equity and inclusivity initiative as part of this. And one of the issues is about building housing is you can build expensive housing, or you can build less expensive. You can you can even build low-income housing that may need to be subsidized. And what actions are we taking or planning to take as part of this effort that would add a focus that would try to include lower income housing as part of these new developments that might be constructed with these new rules?
It's a good question. First, on the CCNRs, I would say, although we've done a smattering of research projects with interns in the past 10 years or so, it's really a matter of capacity in terms of devoting any appreciable amount of staff time into uncovering those when we know that we can't enforce them and that our code needs to comply with the law. So that's just a little bit on CCNRs. The other thing in terms of affordable housing. So as you know, our pillar for Envision Eugene is housing affordable to all income levels. We're always striving to find ways to make different types of housing, including the very most affordable types, possible. Another section of the city actually works on developing that housing. So our community development team works, and through the Construction Excise Tax Committee and the Housing Policy Board, they allocate local resources and processes to develop subsidized housing projects. So that work is ongoing. I feel that it's supported by the policy work and the code work that we're doing to implement this House bill and by the other list of housing projects that are ongoing. But I don't think there's room in our implementation of this bill to require that housing that's built to implement it is affordable to certain income ranges. It's just more of part of a multi-pronged strategy that the city is taking and plans to continue to take to open up opportunity for all different kinds. I would also just add real quick that I think part of the intent of the House bill was to recognize that smaller attached housing types can be more affordable than a bigger detached housing type, all other things being equal. And that being said, new construction is expensive. There's no way around that. So over time, policy changes like this are one way to help address all of the needs.
Well, if I could just make one comment. My only concern is that the way the requirements so far you've stated, for example, in a single family zone, you couldn't restrict the duplex to anything that the single family zone. So you could build the same size house as the single family zone as the duplex. And obviously that would probably not be a very affordable house. So that's my concern, is that we may be building more housing, but we still aren't, focusing on our need. And although we have these other programs, the budget for Housing Policy Board has been going down for 2 decades. So instead of going up, and instead of even keeping up with inflation, it's been going down. So it would be valuable to see what we could do as part of this process to help out in whatever way we can, you know, require a certain percentage of developments over a certain size to have, you know, low income housing, or, you know, there are some requirements like that in other jurisdictions to facilitate that we do actually provide some low income housing.
I hope you continue to add your voice even after you're off the commission.
Okay, that's what I've got in the queue. I'm going to go ahead and ask staff if there are any updates, other items from staff before we adjourn.
I have a couple. Terry, did you need to do any closing remarks or summary or any next steps, or you want me to jump into planning director stuff?
You can go ahead and jump in. I would just say to the Planning Commission to anticipate some emails, because once we have a refined healthy democracy proposal, we'll want to come back to you.
Great. Thank you, Terry. That's great.
I just have a couple of things. Your next scheduled meeting that has an agenda item is July 21st, which is a Tuesday night. You've got a public actually a work session and a public hearing on a digital sign code amendment. This is something that was initiated by council, and Janessa Dragovich will be leading that. You'll have plenty of materials in advance, but just wanted to give you an update on that. I've left the July 14th meeting on your calendar, even though there's nothing planned for that or the July 27th. But we are trying to get a fair housing training on one of those. I know a number of you have done fair housing trainings, but not everybody has. And I think it's always good to get a refresher, and there's always new information. And it seemed really timely, really relevant. So we're working to get one of those on one of those nights. And I forgot to just, Commissioner Fragula just texted me because she got dropped. Her Wi-Fi is not working so well at the moment, so she got dropped. And I'll provide these updates to her as well. Let's see, your new planning commissioner will start July 1st. So one of those July meetings will be his first meeting. His name is Daniel Isaacson. We haven't met him yet. We do know he's a small business owner, went to the University of Oregon, and then also has a master's degree in public administration. And so we look forward to meeting with him. I have reached out, and we're hopeful to be able to set up a training with our lead staff here and give him up to speed somewhat, but I'm hopeful some of you can also be some buddies for him. There's a lot to learn. We were going to be starting with a quasi-judicial hearing, and I'm actually kind of thankful we're not. That's not going to be his first hearing. So, so we'll be looking forward to welcoming him come July. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is this isn't actually Steve's last meeting for the city. On tomorrow actually is a historic review board meeting at 2 o'clock via Zoom. And they are going to be talking about providing a letter to the University of Oregon Board of Trustees about the renaming of Dede Hall, because they're going to be taking up the renaming of that site. So anyway, if you're interested in that topic, that should be a really interesting meeting to attend. And I think that's all I have. I will say we have a lot after our 3 to 4 month pause on some of our projects. We definitely are filling up your agenda for the next many months, and we're going to try to hope to get in some HB 2001. We need to have to check back in with you about healthy democracy and the public involvement plan. So there'll probably be another meeting, but that may not need to be a full 2-hour meeting. So I feel like with Zoom, maybe we have a little flexibility. It might be easier to get you all together for a 1-hour meeting. So, but we'll try not to abuse that privilege. So again, thank you. And that's all I have.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. First Zoom meeting in the books. So thank you all for your patience as I'm trying to manage 3 screens. So I appreciate it. And if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting for today.
I just wanted to mention, if there were really interesting historic attachments for the meeting tomorrow. And if anyone's interested, there's some very interesting research that's been done about Dede and Dunn that I'd be glad to forward by some nationally known historians who did these very elaborate research reports on those two individuals for the university, which is, being considered.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. I'll leave you all to your day. Have a good one.